Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Kathy Im, and I am the Director of Journalism and Media at the MacArthur Foundation. We are in Chicago, Illinois, in USA. It's my pleasure to be here today and to welcome all of you to this panel. We have been funding independent media and journalism for about 40 years. But press freedom and press protections for about the last 10 years. The International Women's Media Foundation, which is the host of this panel, has been a core and anchor grantee for us for those past 10 years or so, and I'm just very pleased to be able to welcome all of you and to get this panel started. It gives me great pride to be able to introduce this work and these courageous journalists to you, but it also breaks my heart that we have to have a panel about journalists at risk because, you know, we'd much rather talk about positive things. But it is the situation we're in, and I just want to quote, I think Joel Simon is in the room, but he recently wrote an article or an essay in Vanity Fair, and I just want to quote some research that he cited in his essay. This comes from the VDEM Institute, which is a global democracy research project. And I know most of you know this way better than I do, but I think it bears repeating. For the first time in more than 20 years, the world now has more autocracies than democracies. And 27 countries, let that sink in, 27 countries have transitioned from democracies to autocracies since 2005. That is really alarming and very, very scary. And in that environment, we have journalists at the forefront protecting our democracy, defending our democracy, because the study goes on to say the favorite weapon of autocratizers is media censorship. And so what we have here, thanks to IWMF, is a panel of reporters, courageous reporters from around the world who will share their experiences, their personal experiences, working in these environments, and also the ways in which that they have taken the tools and training that they've learned from IWMF to continue to do their work. So I'm so pleased to introduce Elisa Lees Muñoz, who's with IWMF, who's the executive director, who will moderate this panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathy, and we could not be more grateful for the support of the MacArthur Foundation that makes our work possible. It's a sincere honor to be here with these courageous women journalists. I think it's important to note the particular and unique risks that women journalists face, women journalists and journalists from underrepresented communities who are targeted around the world. And the work of the IWMF centers on that intersection, but we know that the issues faced by women and other journalists at risk is really intersectional, and especially in our safety work, we support journalists of all genders. We would never assume that male journalists are immune from the kind of risks that these journalists are facing. So I am going to try to speak as little as possible because these women journalists are the story, and their courage, I think, will inspire you. And I think these are stories that we need to know more, and we need to report out and be aware that the risks that journalists are taking are for our benefit and for the benefit of our communities. And I know, again, I'm preaching to the choir, but for reporters out there, I think writing these stories, and I know you hate to be the center of the story, I think it's time to share with the public what's at stake here. So without further ado, I will introduce our distinguished panelists, and I will start with Dana Koester, who is the founder and editor-in-chief of 100 Days in Appalachia, a US-based organization in West Virginia. Sadly, the US is now among one of the primary countries that the IWMF has had to focus its safety work on, and you'll hear more about why shortly. Andrea Hernandez is from Once Noticias in Honduras, and you will hear about her experiences as a women journalist reporting in a country where journalism is under attack. And last but not least, Mimi Mefu-Newu is the founder and CEO of Mimi Mefu Info from Cameroon, and she also works for a number of other media organizations, including Deutsche Welle and others. So let's hear from them what their experiences are in this environment of heightened risk and attacks against journalists, how they are dealing with it, what we all have to learn from their experiences, I think will be instrumental. So I will just ask each of them to tell us a little bit about their media organizations, what they focus on, the issues that they cover, and perhaps why those issues put them and their media organizations in particular risk. So why don't we start with Mimi?
Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be here today. Thank you for inviting me, and particularly to the International Women's Media Foundation, which is doing a fantastic job to assist journalists, particularly female journalists at risk across the world. My name is Mimi Mefu-Newu. I founded an online media platform which is called Mimi Mefu Info since 2018 in Cameroon. And the media was born at the backdrop of attacks, repression on traditional media, because at the time when it was created, I was working with one of the most prominent private media in Cameroon, Equinox TV. And that time we're told not to report certain things about the conflict that is raging in Cameroon at the moment. So I saw social media as that space where we could report there freely without being censored by the National Communication Council that has been put in place to regulate the media. But just after it was created, I now realize that the repression that the media is facing in Cameroon is not just against independent and private media, but is also affecting online media platforms like myself. So we've existed against all odds, reported about the conflict. We are a team of about 15 journalists covering Cameroon, the socio-political situation in the country. We report about the Boko Haram atrocities in the far north region, the Anglophone crisis in the northwest and the southwest. We report about the political landscape in the country, everything that is happening in Cameroon. That is our area of focus, particularly because, like I said, there is a conflict that is going on in the English-speaking parts of the country, but the stories of women are not being told routinely, not even by the local media, not by the international media. So we use our platform. We are on Facebook, on Instagram, on X. We also have a website page where we report about some of these things that are happening in Cameroon that are not being told on the international media. I also work, like Lisa said, for the German public broadcaster Deutsche Welle. I've been with them since 2019, but I've continued to work and report about Cameroon from Europe with my team. My team is also back home, and most of them have to report using pseudonyms, not their real names, for reasons that we all know. Yeah, so we'll get to know about each other shortly. But that's all that I can say about myself for now. Thank you.
Andrea?
About me and my organization, I'm a journalist with 10 years experience on TV in Honduras, but we also have all of the media platforms, like in social media, the website, and everything. And I'm one of the first journalists in Honduras who began to investigate the former president of my country. He was involved in a drug network, trafficking network, and it's impacting to speak about that and to start speaking about that, because people look at you and tells you you're crazy because you're facing power that way. And that's part of my experience. And TV channel where I work, it's private, but we have maybe the characteristic that we can share a lot of information and we don't have compromise with anyone or any political party. And that's part of my story.
Dana.
Thank you very much. Dana Kester I founded 100 Days in Appalachia in 2016, the day after the first Trump administration election. And we came under fire within our first one. We were going to be a pop-up. We came under fire within our first 100 days of operation, and were put on a hit list by a far-right news org. But we were put on a hit list with other orgs like New York Times or CNN that were much more robust and had resources, and we were a 100-day-old outlet that had no preparation for facing the kinds of attacks that were coming at us. And part of the reason that we came under attack is we didn't intend for this to be a topic of focus for our newsroom, but it became one because it was so regionally significant, as we began investigating the rise of domestic violent extremism in the US, and we're covering Unite the Right, Charlottesville, white supremacy rallies in Kentucky and throughout our region. And the more we covered that, the more under attack we became. But I want to, I was thinking, you used the word courage, and I always say, courage is not the absence of fear. And I don't know who said that, but I think of that often, and we started a community of practice among other local at-risk journalists who were trying to do this work across the country. We could see what was happening in our communities, and we knew that they needed support to do this work. And one of the first places we turned to was IWMF. And I believe it was in 2018, I did a hostile environment and first aid HEFAT training with my team. And then we began to try and translate that for the new forms of civil unrest and conflict reporting that were becoming a new norm in the United States.
Thank you. I'm going to stick with you for a moment. Can you tell us the size of your media organization and how difficult was it to try to put safety as part of your news enterprise?
Very small. We had no full-time reporters. We were a fully remote, digital newsroom. We had freelance and sort of stringers throughout the region. At the time when we started, we were very small. We're still small. We have 4 full-time people now. But we felt like we're very representative of many, many other small, very important local and regional newsrooms that we feel like is the most important place where this work needs to be done. So some of the existing trainings at the time for digital safety and security, physical safety, did not translate to that small of a newsroom. But on the other hand, I would say small rooms are quite nimble. You actually have you can create an environment of less threat exposure because you can be more controlled in a very small environment. I think one of the other things that was hard, though, is really we're creating new practice because there's new ethical models. Like, for instance, we just went through a sort of revisiting informed consent for Palestinian students in a piece that we did last spring, but we feel like informed consent in the current US landscape has evolved in the last year for people who are willing to be on camera a year ago and the kinds of threats they're experiencing now. And that's not typically a thing that a newsroom would do, would go back after the fact and say, are you still okay? Do you still feel safe to be in this, to be on camera, in this work? And anyway, sorry, I went off on another tangent, but yeah, it's new practice all the time, I feel like now.
Yeah. Andrea, can you speak to that?
In our case, we are the third biggest TV channels on my country that are not that big like the ones here in this continent. It's a 100 people organization, and we grew up fast because of that trial, the trial of the former president that we covered. And we have the liberty, I can say, to speak about that without compromises, because there's a lot of corruption in my country. So I think that changed the game.
Is your organization implementing overall safety practices based on your experiences?
Now, yes, but before it was a mess. Now, with the help of IWMF, we decided to prepare our journalists in the Safety in Numbers program, and I think it helps a lot, because before that, we don't know what to do if something happens, if someone tries to shoot our cars. We don't know what to do, because in the college, no one tells you what to do in that kind of situations. And we try to survive every day, but we understand that we need that kind of studies, and we need that kind of information to be safe in every situation, not just in the political coverage, because it is hard to do that on my country, but in any situation, it's necessary. Now, yes, we took that.
And Mimi, you have reporters in country and out of country. Can you talk about the safety practices that you practice on a regular basis?
Yes, a lot, not very different from what Andrea is saying, because we, as I said earlier, we have about 15 journalists from back home reporting about Cameroon. Most of them are working voluntarily, actually, but they will have to use their pseudonyms, like fake names, to byline articles for their safety, because if they use their real names, they become targets, maybe by the separatists or by the government forces. That is one of the precautions that we put in place to keep our journalists safe. Also, we make sure that we check in on them, like every day, to find out if they are doing well. Like we have every day, we have editorial meetings in the morning. It's done virtually, but also very, very safe for them. We also have trainings from the International Women's Media Foundation, and we were being trained on how to protect journalists, particularly those who are reporting from the conflict zones in the Northwest and the Southwest regions. But like also Andrea said, safety can never, you never know what could happen, because there was a day that one of the reporters came in the morning. We didn't see him at the news conference, and we were worried, because we always check in the morning to know whether they are fine. And he only came back after a day and said he just woke up and security forces barged in to check the phones. And that's what they normally do, irrespective of who you are, whether you're a journalist or a civil society or an ordinary citizen. They can just come into your house in the conflict zone, because they just carry out routine checks, but they don't notify the local residents. So that's what can happen without prior knowledge. You never know what could happen today or tomorrow. So you can never be ready sometimes. It can get difficult, but we try our best to kind of keep the journalists safe, conceal their identity, use my face and my personality also to keep them safe. Yeah.
I think that the protocols are also important. Before 2023, we don't have protocols, and now I think it's totally different. You know, when you know who to call if something happens to you, a person who isn't involved in anything that can negotiate for you. I think it's really important to have protocols and to follow them and to teach your people how to follow them to be safe. It's amazing.
I will share that I had a swatting risk last summer, and fortunately, I had a protocol. We had already been through training for that. I had a literal sheet of paper in front of me that gave me the steps to follow. It also helps. I want to say that the formal trainings and the formal processes as a community of practice are really important, because if you're just an individual trying to defend yourself, you're out of luck. But if you have support structures, other orgs that you can point to, if you can say, I had to go to our local sheriff and our local police department to even explain to them what swatting was, and having something that explained it in kind of a neutral, at arm's length distance from me way was really, really powerful for them taking me seriously in ways that they probably wouldn't have otherwise.
I want to just touch on something that Mimi said, which was that sometimes your reporters use pseudonyms to report, which, I've obviously heard that happening in other countries. And I think in some places that haven't quite gotten to that level, there's a lot of resistance. But Dana, you were mentioning that this is something that you are starting to contemplate. Can you address?
Yeah, so we were just talking about this morning, and that has not been a common practice in the US, but we have many local journalists who are at risk. Perhaps they're covering immigration, they're a trans journalist or a person of color, and they're covering something sensitive, very findable in a local region. It's really different to being a local reporter doing this difficult work than being in New York or at a national org. And we've had them start to talk to us about, asking our advice, and then I go to the smart community of folks that we're grateful to be in community with about, is it ethical to use a pseudonym? And we have started to shift our thinking toward absolutely. If it enables you to do this work, and we can do this, and we have defensible practices. So when I say we have to create new practices, some of them are pushing back at some of the national standards that our larger orgs have, but are becoming more necessary at the local level.
I think that's why it's so important to realize that safety training isn't one size fits all, and you really have to think about the local context.
I would like to share an example of this kind of situations. I have write it here to not extend myself. And during the trial of the former president of my country, a witness who collaborates with the Justice Department provide information for a congressman that received a large amount of money. And I remember that he comes from a wealthy background. And since I already knew he comes from a wealthy background, I decided to focus my questions on a car. The witness talked about a specific car model, and I asked him about that. He escalated and turned very violent, and we were live on TV. So he called my personal phone and said me in an aggressive tone that my questions were hurting his family. And he invited me to visit where he lives in the north of my country so he could entertain me in a menacing tone. You laugh, but it was hard. And I totally understand the message. So I think when you speak about political violence, you have to identify that message, to recognize where it comes, the harassment, and how it works. And it's very interesting to share this experience because I haven't a plan. I don't know what to do. And my reaction was record that call because I have an application with a caller ID on my phone. And it really helps me a lot. But before that, I didn't know what to do.
So, yeah, I just wanted to add another point that because the core of, or to identify a beautiful report is when we have sources of like quotes, interviews, and so on. And most of us here might be asking, if you want to write like an investigative report on Cameroon, how do you get to talk to people? How do you get to talk to sources? So what some of the reporters on the ground will do is they can, because we receive a lot of messages about things that are happening in some areas, reporters cannot really be there on the ground because it's so unsafe for them. Human Rights Watch cannot even visit Cameroon to report like from the ground about what is happening. Committee to Protect Journalists cannot go to Cameroon. And it's even worse for reporters on the ground who can be identified. So what happens is if we have a contact of a news source, for instance, I get to do the interview from outside Cameroon, and I then can transcribe and give it to the reporter to work on them. Because sources in news reporting is very, very important, and many people might be wondering, how do you fact check? How do you get to know that the report that you're writing and publishing is actually factual? So I just wanted to stress on that as well.
Yeah, thank you. At the IWMF, we believe that identity is really a central part to your safety. And I want to ask each of you how your gender, how you think your gender might impact the kind of threats and attacks you're receiving from the public or from government officials, and also your response. And also, just if you could add a little bit about your families, because we know that these attacks on journalists often impact your families.
So the attacks on journalists, I would want to talk about the case of Cameroon particularly, could get really vile, and the level of attacks are endless, particularly for women. Sometimes people will feel in Cameroon is a country that many would have the impression that a woman cannot lead an organization. You cannot be at the helm of an institution, talk less of a media that is holding power to account and reporting objectively about the things that are happening in the country. So it becomes even very, very difficult as a head of a media house. I come from a country where we have very few women leading the media, and we are running one of the most powerful independent media on the digital space. So it's even terrible. The attacks come from across the board, not just from the government, supporters of the government. We have also attacks from the separatists who are waging a pro-independence war in the English-speaking regions of the country. When the attacks are not in their favor, they come online, guns blazing, insulting you, and even when you are questioning the political situation in the country, we have a 92-year-old leader in power, and President Biya has been in power for 43 years. The question that any journalist would ask is, what happens after Biya, and who is a better replacement? Is the opposition fit to wear the shoes of the current leader of the country? How different is the current opposition? The opposition parties to their supporters who come attacking you. So the attacks are just, it's not like it's just the government supporters attacking journalists. We also have the opposition. We also have the separatist rebels that are attacking journalists every day. And it even gets worse because they take it to social media. They would tag you even on articles that you didn't write, that some of your reporters wrote. They would use your family, your children, pictures of yourself and pictures of your children. It gets even worse. I would not want to belittle the attacks that some of my male colleagues get on a daily basis, but I can say that they are so bold enough that the things that they say to female journalists, they won't say that to our male colleagues. Like they would call you prostitute, they would use sorry for saying that, but I just have to be very honest about the kind of attacks that we face. They can even say you are reporting fake news. They will call you, they would really, it's like coordinated, it's like a smear campaign, but some people will just look at some of the attacks and start asking, could this be true? There was a time when there was like an ongoing narrative to say, oh, she's reporting this because she's the girlfriend. I'm married, of course, I'm a mom, but they will say because she's the girlfriend of this particular person. So the level of attack sometimes can be so demeaning, it can be so vile, that you feel sometimes like being a woman, should I keep doing this? You know, so it even gets worse for female journalists in Cameroon.
I want to share another example of my life. I have a lot, but I think this one is important because I'm a woman and I'm young, and the chief of the army forces of my country, during an interview, but in the commercials off cameras, he told me that you are a woman and you're young and you don't know how to ask about that topic. So I promised myself to prepare and be the best journalist in my country to face them with property. And I remember that time I requested to my camera director record everything, even the commercials, because I expected that, and I knew it will happen. And during the interview, this person, the chief of the army forces of my country, I had a question, and I wanted to do that, but I did that through Facebook Live. I read a comment with a person who asked him about a person who was murdered in a high-security jail in my country. And I knew he will be a witness during the trial of the former president in the US. And they murdered him like, I cannot tell you, but it was a difficult situation, and I took the question from the social media, and his answers were very political, but off the cameras during the commercial, he told me, I didn't think you were going to ask that question. You are brave, and you and your family live near here, right? And he was right. We live near the TV channel where I work. But my reaction was to tell him no. And that night after work, they followed me on a motorcycle. And my reaction also was to go to a street where there are embassies. So I knew there are security cameras and everything, but I didn't have a plan. And that's because now I think with the support of IWMF and other organizations, we can make better decisions in that kind of situations when you didn't expect to happen something like that.
Yeah, I agree with all of your experiences. The particular ugliness of going after women journalists, I think, is a global experience, and I've experienced a lot of it even before doing this more recent work. But I wanted to speak to the issue about family, I think, because we had, in our first part of experiencing attacks, we had attacks on our home, vandalism on our home, which was really gross, and people that would show up if we were sitting on our porch, that would be sort of, walking menacingly down the street. So just a real, communicating, we know where you live. And we were there was one time where one of my boys at the time was crying in my kitchen and saying, why are you putting this, why are you putting a target on our backs? And it was really hard to try and figure out how to protect my family, defend the work so that we could keep doing it. And also I'm part of a Muslim community in Appalachia and have Muslim family members, and I felt a lot of responsibility to not bringing sort of, second, party attacks on them just because people were going after me and our work. And those are really, really tough conversations to have, and in fact, I think that's another sort of support structure we need to have, because I know that people in our community of practice are asking for it, is how do we talk to family members about safety and security without alarming them, but also making sure they also feel protected and invested in supporting the work. So that's something else that we need to work on.
I think as a woman, they try to minimize your work too, a lot.
And also discredit you. There was an incident on a live state television, because when we come to events like this, it's not just about our story. We want to tell the stories of female journalists back home in Cameroon, in our countries, and journalists in general. On a live television on state media, a politician questioned a female colleague, a female journalist, why she was interviewing him. Why would you, a woman, talk to me, a politician? And this was a politician who wanted to be a president in the country. He's always been an opposition in quote, trying to unseat the current president. There was a lot of backlash from journalists, but the communication ministry said nothing about that. The National Communication Council, which is the media regulatory board in Cameroon, didn't say anything about that. When you are in a country where you feel unsafe, publicly humiliated as a woman, and the board, the institution that is supposed to protect you, says nothing about it, it tells a lot about what women in Cameroon are facing. I just wanted to bring that example to just show that it's not just about me, it's a general situation, particularly for female journalists in the country where I come from.
Thank you. I think this all points to the incredible toll that this work can have on journalists, and a lot of work that the IWMF does and other organizations do on trauma support for journalists. And I just want to touch on that because I think it's so critically important to hear not only how you get the support that you need to be able to continue to do this work.
Well, for me, the most important part is being in community with other journalists who are experiencing similar things and making sure that we have safe, protected ways to communicate and support each other. And so that's something, that we've really worked hard at trying to sort of create those whisper networks that are safe and create spaces to be together. I think one of the other things that we have to recognize in the context of heightened digital surveillance is we need more safe, in-person, non-digital spaces to be in community, to strategize in order to be safe. And the other thing that I'm very worried about is the number of young people who are turning away from this work. We do this when we're vetting people into a project, and we try and do, if it's extremism related or there is some risk involved, and we do this informed consent process, and a lot of them are frankly like, I want nothing to do with that, I'm going to do something else. And so we're trying to figure out how to also safely nurture young reporters to come into this work and not scare them away, but also they do need to understand what it involves, and making sure we have the support structures in place to support them.
Okay. In my case, I received a huge life lesson last year in Mexico with IWMF during my HIFA training, because I had the opportunity to meet amazing journalists. And they were in the same situation as me, and I remember Juanita. Juanita gave us a QR code, and it says, "You're not alone." And that's exactly how I felt back in that moment, alone, because nobody wants to talk about the difficult topics. Nobody wants to put in risk their lives. And I met these amazing people in the same situation in Venezuela, in Mexico, in Brazil. Even I remember Marina Diaz from the Washington Post. She told us her story when he were asking the president, Bolsonaro, and his answer were, "You are a whore," from a president. It's really hard, but we were in the same situation as you will know now, and it changed for me the whole game to have a network with another journalist in the same situation who understands what you are saying, who understands your problems, and where you can go when you have a problem that maybe they lived at. And I think it's life-changing for me.
Well, this is, we haven't talked about it since the start of the discussion, but in 2018, I was arrested and jailed in Cameroon for reporting the killing of an American missionary, Wesco Truman, who was visiting the conflict-hit part of the country as a missionary to assist women and vulnerable people affected by the war and generally in Cameroon. So when I reported it with my media, I was summoned, taken for questioning. That same day, I went to the military tribunal, which is so unfair for journalists. Generally, that's how journalists in Cameroon are tried and then taken to prison on that same day. But because of the huge national and international mobilization that came after that, journalists in Cameroon came together, condemned the arrest and detention. Even the international community wasn't happy about it. I was released. But after that, because we thought that was like that breaking point when it comes to the media landscape and press censorship, the world could see now that being a journalist in Cameroon was very, very risky. And we thought with my case it was going to end, but it just got worse. Because after that, a lot of journalists were arrested and 3 more reporters were killed. The corpse of one of them, Samuel Wazizi, has never been found. We don't know what happened next, what is happening. The reason why I'm bringing this case is because the mobilization that my case had, the level of cooperation, unity, and how journalists came together to call for my release was something that every journalist in Cameroon, every journalist in Africa, and anywhere else in the world needs if they are in any kind of situation. But later, we didn't get to see that. The reason is simple, because there's been a lot of intimidation against journalists in Cameroon. And as a result, the union is fragmented. There's a lot of skepticism. There's a lot of uncertainty. And in the face of this, we only have our colleagues out of the country to depend on. After that, I had to travel to London under the International Writers Association English Pen as a fellow to work with them for a few months and just have a rest. And then I was also invited to London by the Index on Censorship organization, later by the German broadcaster DW. I've been working a lot with committee, our media has been working a lot with Committee to Protect Journalists, the International Women's Media Foundation, and so on and so forth. So these are the institutions that when you know you have their support, it gives you like hope. It gives you that that power to continue to move on, because you know that you have people around you to support you. But not every journalist has that opportunity, has that privilege, because some of them are currently behind bars. They've not had that privilege to receive the kind of mobilization that I in my own case, received. So yes, in a way, we have the support, we have the assistance that we need, but sometimes I just worry whether there is something else that we need to do to stop maybe journalists from being held. Is there something that we are not doing? Is there something that we need to do to make sure that no journalist is behind bars? I question myself sometimes, and I don't have answers, unfortunately, yeah.
Thank you. I think that good old-fashioned mobilization and networking, and it always amazes me that every journalist we speak to says that being physically present among a group of your peers is so incredibly impactful. So we only have a couple of minutes left, but I do want to leave on a high note, because I'm always so incredibly amazed that women like you decide to stay in this for years and years at a time, when I think that most people would hang it up. So just very quickly, what keeps you going?
Wow. I would say, well, we're responding to what's in front of us. I mean, it really is. It's waking up every day. We have a community of folks who come to us and say, here's the thing I need. And so I think just being in that response mode. Also, if any of you are a fan of Reacher, which is a US show, there's a thing called Reacher's Rule, which is deal with just the exact thing that's right in front of you. The other thing is next week's problem, so I use that.
Very good.
In my case, the people, the audiences, because Honduras is a very problematic country where I think 40% of the population is on extreme poverty, and I think it's a moral compromise with the people.
Mimi?
So for me, it's beyond vocation, it's a duty. We owe the public that duty to inform the society, the world at large, what is happening with them on a daily basis. There are women in desperate situations in Cameroon. There are young girls who have not been to school because of a conflict that they didn't ask for. And the security apparatus in place, the legal institutions that are in place, and even the executive members of the government that were voted to solve these problems are not solving them. So the only place that they have, the only safe place that they have is the media. And I can recall a time when our website completely went down, because sometimes we face like attacks on the website. There are so many people trying to kind of bring down the website. And there were so many messages came in asking us, what happened today? What happened to news? Don't we have any information today? Those messages kept ringing that bell that we are that hope that the people in Cameroon have when it comes to information, when it comes to telling their story to the rest of the world. I would want to call it a success story. I would not want this to look like, oh, journalism is something that it's not supposed to be for the faint-hearted. It's something that is risky. It's a profession that people shouldn't delve into because it's very dangerous. I would want to call it as a profession that is something like it's a calling. It's something that has to do with saving lives, even though we are not medical doctors. It has to do with telling the stories that someone somewhere doesn't want those stories told, and creating an impact in the society. That's what I believe in, and that's why we will not give up.
Well, gosh, that's a great place to end. Thank you all for coming. Please support journalists in your communities and around the world. And we owe these women an incredible debt for their contributions to the world and to their own communities. So thank you for joining us, and we are with you. You are not alone.
Thank you for having us.